As I prayed for the Lord to help my brother and I see clearly, I felt a desire to have stronger faith, a faith that was not based on blind ignorance or emotional biases. It was time to grow up in my faith and stand firm in the truth with a new kind of faith, built upon reality and not emotions or biased assumptions. If I needed to strip away 25 years of biases to get there, I would do it. Truth was my goal. But I didn't want to fall for Satan's deceptions and lose my salvation. The scriptures teach us that the devil has sought to lay a cunning plan, that he may destroy this work. I didn't want to lose my eternal family. I couldn't bear losing my wife and kids. I knew that our leaders have cautioned us to stay away from anti-Mormon literature and apostates, for they may cause us to lose our testimonies and fight against God. I didn't want to lose my temple worthiness by associating with ex-members or apostates. I remembered the temple recommend question: do you support, affiliate with, or agree with any group or individual whose teachings or practices are contrary to or oppose those accepted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? I loved my brother, but I wanted to do what was right in the Lord's eyes. We've been told to avoid those who would tear down our faith. As a teenager, I saw the opposition firsthand. I remember traveling over 10 hours to hear the prophet speak at General Conference. On my way to the conference center, I ran into some protesters, angrily holding up signs trying to discredit the church. For the rest of the day, I pondered the significance of this event. Why would people be driven to protest against such a remarkably good church? Then it dawned on me, the LDS Church is true, and Satan was fighting against it. That became a personal pillar of my testimony, and it stayed with me for a long time. Satan's over-expanding efforts are some proof of the truthfulness of this work. I knew that my only hope in saving my brother was to rely heavily on the Lord, so I prayed like never before. The next day, a knock came on my door. I was surprised to see 2 missionaries standing on my doorstep. They were from the Jehovah's Witness faith, and we began to talk about religion. As they bore their testimony to me, explaining that the Jehovah's Witness faith was the only true faith recognized by God, I noticed something happen. It was like a wave of inspiration swept over my body as I realized I was looking into a mirror of my own faith. I knew immediately what God was trying to teach me. I didn't have to unlearn my own faith or study its apostate literature to remove my bias. I could simply use the Jehovah's Witness faith as a proxy for my own. The beautiful part was I had no bias, no investment, no eternal family on the line. I was free to study their group objectively and critically, and perhaps in the process learn something about my faith and how the world sees us. After the missionaries went home, my mind began to fill with questions. The similarities between our 2 faiths seemed striking. We both viewed our group as the only true church, and viewed our leaders as God's mouthpiece to the world. And yet our doctrines and practices were quite different. They believed Jesus was the last prophet, and no further scriptures could be added to the Bible. They did not believe in a spirit world, a pre-existence, or even a place for sinners in the afterlife. But strangely, we were both very certain of our convictions. I decided to meet current and former members in real life, and on the internet forums and YouTube, to see what they had to say.
We're all united by our love for God and our love for the Bible, and nowhere else can you go anywhere in the world and find that unity. In order to be a Jehovah's Witness, you have to make the truth your own. And no one can force you. You can't force someone to love anyone or anything. It has to come from your heart.
I noticed they had a beautifully structured belief system, similar to our own. The next thing I noticed was they had protesters too. In less than a second, I felt a pillar of my faith fall away. I realized our church was not the only one that had persecution. The Jehovah's Witnesses said that their persecution proved that Satan and the entire world was bent in a conspiracy against them because they were God's one and only true church. My mind was boggled. Why would Satan persecute a church that spreads false doctrine? Because I had no investment or bias in the Jehovah's Witness faith, I was able to ask the next question. Could there be a logical reason people were persecuting the Jehovah's Witnesses? I decided to find out.
Jehovah's Witnesses do not take blood, even if it means your life.
Because as Jehovah's Witnesses, if we freely gave a blood transfusion to our daughter, we'd be excommunicated, we'd be disfellowshipped. And the doctor looked me straight in the eye and said, Mr. and Mrs. Blizzard, you have to make a decision, yes or no, whether your child lives or dies. I remember going over to the bed, and she had these cords and wires keeping her alive, life support systems, and holding this limp child that was our only daughter, and just going over to the window and looking out and watching the clouds and the sky, and just started to weep. And I said, "Oh God, Jehovah," and I prayed to Jehovah.
We just had a real distinct impression that we were supposed to obey God's law and go by what we had always been taught, and that we were to let our daughter die.
People are dying every year. Children are dying. Older people are dying. People in accidents are dying.
So we just called the doctors back in and told them that we had just had to let her die, that we had to obey God's law.
I personally don't think my mother would have ever joined them had she had the fine print up front and had she known that she would be expected to never speak to her daughter someday.
If I leave for any reason, my family is taught by the Watchtower Society to shun me completely.
My mother told me I should never speak to our relatives again, including the cousins I had played with, because, as she put it, Satan might be using them to keep us from learning the truth.
We were not merely dropped from membership. We were actually shunned as being evil.
2 daughters and their husbands and a grandson, and they don't speak to us any longer because we are no longer Jehovah's Witnesses.
I miss my parents so badly sometimes. I feel like my heart is breaking.
I ended up losing my children.
I lost the place that I live.
I lost my mom.
They don't have anything to do with me.
I lost my family.
Lost my dad.
I was disfellowshipped.
I lost my wife.
I lost my 2 sisters.
I can't talk to my best friend.
My dad told me to never talk to him again.
The Watchtower Society essentially kidnaps our family.
So you can imagine how traumatic this is for a lot of people who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Do they have the right to disassemble and destroy families for a lifetime?
I wanted to give the Jehovah's Witnesses the benefit of the doubt, but after investigating both sides, it seemed possible that their persecution did have a logical reason after all. People's families and lives were being hurt by their doctrines. I grew concerned for those that were suffering. They were labeled apostates and rejected as the devil. But their cause was just. I could not understand why the Watchtower organization would discourage proper medical care and shun family members. There was something inherently unloving and irrational about this. But I could not figure out what had happened to their minds. What would cause this behavior?
All we've done is said, we love everybody, we want to follow our Lord Jesus Christ, and as a result of that, we now have hundreds of people who won't even acknowledge us in the street and hate the ground we walk on. So we find that fascinating, but we don't hate them at all back. We love them very much. We understand the grip that is on them.
What was this grip?
It's very clear to us once you step away how much of a hold they have on you. You can't see the wood for the trees until you step out of the forest and take a look back and you go, good grief, how did I not see that?
Jehovah's Witnesses, there is an intense amount of brainwashing that has gone on.
I was surprised by the number of witnesses saying they were brainwashed. What did they mean by brainwashing?
I'm coming off of a lot of the effects of mind control, because that's what it is. I've done the research.
I was being kept loyal through methods of mind control and propaganda techniques.
We can see through all of the manipulation. We can see through all of the mind tricks.
I always thought that mind control was something from the movies. So when the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses began explaining how their minds had been manipulated and controlled by specific techniques, I was in shock and amazement. At first, I resisted, but then I felt peace, knowing that this information came as a result of my sincere prayers. Slowly, it all started to make sense. This is how they do it.